Thank you, Nicholas. And I just want to say first, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to represent Microsoft at what I know is an important conversation with a number of critical hosts and co-hosts, really representing so many parts of Europe and the world. And the topic is important. It's really about our future. In some ways, it's about the future of humanity. It's about the intersection between the needs of humanity and technology, most notably, of course, artificial intelligence or AI. Whenever I think about this issue, I think it starts often by defining our goals. And in many ways, I think the goals are twofold. First, it's critically important that we harness the power of AI to serve humanity and advance the needs of our societies. And second, we need to protect people. We need to protect humanity from what otherwise could become the abuses of this new technology. And we really need to keep both of these in constant view. In many ways, I start naturally with what we need AI to do. We're entering a 30-year period where we are going to have two fundamental needs as a planet and certainly across Europe. We've got to move to a decarbonized future, to a net zero economy by 2050, and we need to adapt to changing demographics. Every 5 years, every decade, we're going to see more people retiring than entering the workforce. So for the first time in history, we've got to reverse the effects of climate change and adapt to a shrinking population. How do we do this? Well, for both of these things, we need to put AI to work to help us advance the technologies needed to reduce carbon emissions, to remove carbon from the environment, to make people more productive and hopefully in pursuing more rewarding work. And we need to do it in new ways that complement people to advance productivity, because that's the only way that we're going to continue to expand and grow prosperity. So in many ways, I'll say more than ever, we need AI. We need AI to help us break through in science and technology and to advance what we all need to do in the organizations where we work. But we also need to recognize that just as every tool can become a weapon, AI risks being abused in the future. In some ways, it's such a powerful tool that it also makes it a more powerful weapon. And that's why I think it's so important that we have these types of conversations to talk about how AI can be used and abused, what companies need to do, and what we're going to need to look to governments to do. I think it starts by being principled. And here I think the world has made a lot of progress. If you look around the world, there have been so many principles for responsible AI. And what I find encouraging is that they're really very similar to each other. At Microsoft, we were one of the early adopters of principles, and we continue to focus on 6. On what it means to protect privacy and safety, what it means to protect against bias, what it means to encourage inclusive access to technology for people, what it means to keep people safe. And then, of course, we focus on these two, what I think of as foundational principles. It's all about transparency and accountability. We constantly need to look at all of these. But if there's one thing we've also learned in the few years since we first published our principles, it's that principles alone are not enough. We have to implement them within organizations. And what's interesting about AI is that it starts with technology companies that create AI, but it then needs to move to the responsible implementation and deployment of AI. Because unlike a lot of other technologies, it doesn't just come in a box. It gets built in customized scenarios by governments, by businesses, by NGOs. So at Microsoft, we've really focused first, as you would expect, on what it takes for us to build AI tools and technologies in a responsible way. We just launched the second version of what we call our Responsible AI Standard. And it's all about providing a baseline for our engineering groups to use so they can recognize when AI can be put to sensitive use. They can identify the potential harms. They can create tools and technologies to mitigate against those harms. And we take the other steps we need to do to train our people and have governance inside Microsoft, and then bring all of that to our customers as well. So they benefit each step of the way from what we're learning, and we learn together from them. This is very much an evolutionary process, and we're all in it together. And then, of course, it goes to the role of government. Here we're seeing a number of governments at the forefront. In some instances, they're focused on very specialized use cases like facial recognition. We've seen some governments around the world impose moratoria on the use of facial recognition. We've seen other governments, like my home state in the United States, Washington State, regulate it through safeguards, guardrails, to ensure that facial recognition is used properly by both the public and private sectors. And I think that points to one of the things we're likely to see: specific laws and regulations for specific use cases for AI. But we're also seeing broader efforts as well, and that's a good thing. We're seeing it in Brussels, of course, at the European Union with the AI Act. We're seeing it in Washington, D.C., where the White House is embarking on what it calls an AI Bill of Rights. We're in fact seeing this in Singapore and other governments around the world. We all are going to need to innovate in law and policy and regulation, perhaps just as much and as quickly as we need to innovate with the technology itself. But I do think as we look to the future of the law, we should go back, in my view, to where I started. It's about two goals. How do we promote the responsible use of AI so it can do what the world needs? How do we protect people's rights so we can keep people safe? The future of humanity, indeed the future of human rights, depends on it. So thank you for what you're doing.